UFC Vegas 90 betting and DraftKings show. We have 12 fights currently this Saturday afternoon. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. And we're going to kick things off in the women's bantamweight division as Melissa Mullins is a minus 355 favorite. The comeback on Nora Coroli is plus 280. And this one, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on because I don't think either of these fighters are very high level. You know, Melissa Mullins was able to get that decision victory against Irina Alekseeva in her UFC debut, but a lot of people thought she could have potentially tried to finish that fight. She really just was not looking to pass, wasn't looking to submit Alekseeva, which I think a lot of people thought could be an angle for her. I did as well. And I think it could be here, but because we didn't see her pursue it in her first fight, it's hard to trust that she'll pursue the finish in this fight as well, despite the fact that Coroli looks to be an absolute zero in terms of her defensive grappling. We saw Jocelyn Edwards put on a grappling clinic against Nora Coroli. Coroli is a powerful striker on the feet, but once you take her down, you can certainly control her, and it seems like she's one that typically starts to fade after that first round. So this is one where I think Mullins is going to have a massive grappling edge, but because she's not super aggressive when she gets the fight to the ground, I'm just not sure if she's going to be able to finish it or not. So the official pick is going to be Mullins. I'm not sure how much I like her on DraftKings. Probably not going to end up fading her completely because we've seen time and time again these last few weeks, like anytime you can get fighters that have a huge grappling edge and they're probably not going to be that owned on DraftKings, you might just end up playing them. We saw it with Macy Chasson, Mateus Gamrot. There's been multiple situations like that recently. I think Mullins could be one of those, but keep your eyes out on Thursday when I release my ownership projections on fightnumbers.com, and we'll see where she shakes out. But the official pick is going to be Mullins by decision. Next fight up, we have Dylan Buka, a minus 155 favorite. The comeback on Cesar Almeida is plus 130. And we'll start on the Buka side. He previously fought on Dana White's Contender Series last season. He won a decision over Chad Hanekom, and this guy comes from a collegiate wrestling background. He wrestled at Notre Dame, which is Division II, and he seems to rely on his wrestling in most of his fights, but the dude's still pretty green as far as I'm concerned. He only turned pro a few years ago, and he doesn't have much to offer on the feet. Like, sure, he's got a little bit of power, he's got sharp leg kicks as well, but he doesn't put a ton of volume out there. He really just wants to move forward and make it ugly, turn it into a dogfight, hold his opponents up against the cage, eventually wrestle them to the ground. When he gets them there, he's not a huge threat to finish the fight either. So he's just a guy that he's got an okay skill set, doesn't really separate in terms of winning rounds, and I just don't think he has much to offer on the feet as well. Now, on the flip side, Cesar Almeida also fought on Contender Series last season. He came through as a big underdog in that fight, and Almeida comes from a high-level kickboxing background. Now, he's making his UFC debut. He is on the older side of 30, but he has a very experienced kickboxing pedigree, and you see it in his striking. He's going to have the biggest advantage in this fight, and I think that's in the striking department. He is way better than Buka on the feet. He's got a bunch of tools. He's very powerful as well. And what was surprising the most to me in that last fight on Contender Series for Almeida is we didn't know what to expect in terms of the grappling. A lot of people suspected it might just be a total zero, and that just wasn't the case. Like, the dude he fought also had a kickboxing background, but was also a legitimate, brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, took the fight to the ground multiple times. Almeida got up, was not controlled the first time, and then the second time was able to reverse him and end up in dominant position as well. So I don't think these takedowns are going to come super easy, and even if they do, Butka's like that lay and pray style is just not going to score enough, especially if Almeida's lighting him up on the feet. So this is one where I expect Almeida to make Buka work really hard for those takedowns. Maybe he gets held up against the fence for a little bit, but anytime these guys are at space, I think Almeida lights him up like a Christmas tree. This is the first bet I made this week at plus 134. I'm on the underdog here. We're going Almeida by TKO. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Gene Matsumoto, a small favorite at minus 162. Now, the comeback on Dan Argueta is plus 136, and this is another Contender Series graduate from this past season, and he's one of the fighters that I was personally the most most excited about because he just seems to have a very well-rounded skill set. He's a 14-0 undefeated prospect fighting out of Brazil. And you saw on Contender Series, this is a guy that's going to push a hard pace. He's got very sharp leg kicks that he'll look for repeatedly. He fought Casey Tanner and beat up those calves immediately and all throughout the fight. It ended up paying huge dividends for him there. And we've seen him do that on the regional scene as well. And he's got good cardio. He's able to push that heavy striking pace for 15 minutes if he needs to. The one concern and the downside of Matsumoto in a matchup like this is we have seen him taken down and controlled at times on the mat. Even in that Casey Tanner fight in round 2 or round 3 where he was taken down, didn't work back up to his feet immediately, got controlled for a little bit. And I think that's the angle for the Dan Argueta love, because we have seen Argueta take some line movement in his favor this week, and I expect him to be a pretty popular underdog as well as the more known fighter of the two in this matchup, with Matsumoto making his UFC debut. The issue that I have with Argueta is, yes, I expect him to maybe be able to use that wrestling advantage early, but he definitely seems more front-loaded to me at times when fights get extended. He seems to not be as explosive. The takedowns come a little bit harder, and I just think on the feet, he is levels worse than a guy like Matsumoto. I expect Matsumoto to have success with those leg kicks immediately, Matsumoto to come on stronger as the fight gets extended. So this is one where I favor a Matsumoto live bet potentially if we expect Argueta to take him down, control him. You know, maybe Argueta flips to the favorite after round 1 and you can hop on Matsumoto live. And even though I think Argueta could wrestle him early, I just have a hard time seeing him like grapple him for 15 minutes throughout the fight without losing significantly in the striking department enough to lose those rounds. So I'm going to side with Matsumoto here. Matsumoto by decision is going to be the official pick, but I'm going to have exposure to both sides on DraftKings. And next fight up, we have Pyro Rodriguez, a -142 favorite now. The comeback on Cynthia Calvo is +120. And this is another one. We've seen the underdog here take some significant line movement as Calvo is creeping up now to a +120. And I get it to a degree because Pyro Rodriguez really just kind of fights on thinner margins. Like, it's hard for me to see her blow out Calvo in this spot. Now, I did pick her to win because I think we have the younger fighter, the fighter that I trust to fight for my money more. Calvo has lost 4 fights in a row. She's quit on the stool against Andrea Lee. She's contemplated retirement. And yes, she's looked better in her last couple fights. You know, she went to a split with Loopy. And this is one that I expect her to fight competitively as well, because on one hand, we have Pyro Rodriguez, who is a good striker, but she doesn't put a ton of volume out there. Cynthia Calvo typically keeps a higher pace than Rodriguez on the feet. And I think either fighter is actually capable of landing takedowns here. We've seen Rodriguez go to the takedowns in all of her fights, even to her own demise against Jillian Robertson, her last time out where she got submitted in the second round. And this is just one where I think both fighters can have spurts of success. It's going to be very competitive. So if that's the case, then naturally you usually want to gravitate to the dog here. I just think in a close fight, I think I'm going to side with the one who I trust more. Pyro is probably landing the bigger shots on the feet, and I trust her to be able to land takedowns better than Calvo. So I'm going to side with Pyro Rodriguez ever so slightly. We're going Rodriguez by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have another female matchup with Norma Dumont, a -175 favorite. The comeback on Germaine de Randamie is +140. And this one, I also don't really love for DraftKings because Norma Dumont, credit to her, she's 6-2 in the UFC. She's put together a nice solid win streak here. But the thing is, I just don't expect her to score enough on DraftKings. And at her price, it just makes me not have a ton of interest, even though I'm pretty confident that she wins, because on the feet, she's not putting a ton of volume out there, but she does stay very safe defensively. She doesn't take a lot of chances. And against somebody like Germaine de Randamie, who at her best is one of the better strikers in the division, the problem is de Randamie's coming off nearly a 4-year layoff. The last time we saw her fight was back in 2020, and she turns 40 years old later this year. So those are two obvious red flags. And we saw her taken down and out-grappled her last couple fights. Yes, that came against better competition in Juliana Pena and Amanda Nunes, but this version of Durandamy, I'm not sure if she's going to be able to stuff those takedowns like she used to be able to earlier in her career. And we know that Norma Dumont is capable of mixing them in. She averages nearly 1.5 takedowns per 15 minutes, holds a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and she's very heavy on top once she's able to take you down. So it's one where I think Durandamy's probably going to make her work, which means we probably see a lot of cage push in this fight, which just isn't going to score enough for me. I expect Dumont to win a decision here, but just not enough to where I see a true ceiling performance here. So we're going Dumont by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Alex Morono, a -305 favorite with Court McGee on the comeback at +245. And this is another one where I just don't love the price on some of these favorites. And Alex Morono fits the same build, because even though I think he should be the favorite, I just have concerns anytime you see him at this big of a chalk price tag, because he's a guy that's proven to be pretty untrustworthy over the course of his career, and he's been knocked out 3 times in his career as well. So I don't even fully trust the durability either. But then on the flip side, it's like Court McGee, even if I expect him to be competitive early, like I do in this matchup, he also has been knocked out, not just in his last fight by Matt Brown, but his last 2 fights. And this is a guy that historically was very durable. Now he's knocking on 40 years old, just like Germaine Durandamy, and we've seen that durability really just not held up as much as it used to. So this is one where I think it's probably pretty competitive early, more so than this betting line indicates. But then I expect the cardio, the volume to be the difference down the stretch for Alex Morono. So I'm going to side with Morono. Don't love the price. Don't love the price on DraftKings either. We're going Morono by decision. That's the official pick. Which brings us to perhaps the funnest fight on the card, as Charlie Campbell is a -218 favorite with everybody's favorite fighter, Trevor Peek, on the comeback at +180. And after a bunch of fights that I don't have a ton of interest for on DraftKings, this is one that I have circled, because I do expect the winner to win by finish, to score well on DraftKings, and to compete for the optimal lineup, regardless of whether or not it's Campbell or Peek. Obviously, it's easier for Peek to end up on the optimal due to pricing, but I think either guy is capable of putting up a big score here. And we'll start on the Campbell side. He's primarily a striker, very clean striker on the feet, former Contender Series guy, another one. We have a lot of them this weekend. And I think Campbell's just going to be the more technical, the cleaner guy on the feet, especially defensively. And he's got legitimate knockout power as well. 6 of his 8 wins have come by knockout. And we know that Trevor Peek is going to bring the fight to him. 8 of Peek's 9 wins have come by knockout. His last fight, he ended up winning a decision at UFC 294. He was a little bit more reserved in that fight, but we still saw flashes of the Trevor Peek we know and love. This is a guy that's going to move forward, throw some crazy stuff, trying to take your head off. He's not super clean, not super technical, and that's what I think could get him in trouble here against Charlie Campbell, who's just going to be much cleaner defensively, stick and move, and he should be able to touch up Trevor Peek on the feet and eventually hurt him. So we're going to side with Campbell. I'm going to have exposure to both sides on DraftKings. We're going Campbell by TKO. That's the official pick. And next up, we have the brother of Johnny Walker. We have Walter Walker, a -310 favorite with the comeback on Lucas Brzeski at +245. And I mentioned Walter Walker's the brother of Johnny Walker. Now, he's certainly not as athletic and as explosive on the feet, but what he lacks in those areas, he makes up for with his wrestling. I think he's a much better wrestler than Johnny Walker is, and he's gone to that in most of his fights. He's an 11-0 undefeated prospect fighting out of Russia. He's actually fought some pretty solid dudes over there and has yet to lose. And a lot of that is because not only does he have the typical heavyweight power on the feet, but he's also got good entries on his takedowns. He's very good in dominant position, looking to finish the fight, control his opponents. And I think that's going to be the difference here against Lucas Brzeski, who's never been able to defend takedowns. He's 0-3 in the UFC. He's been ragdolled against pretty much anyone that he faces who's able to wrestle. And I just think that's the difference here, because even if Brzeski is outpacing him on the feet with that volume, I just think he's going to end up on his back more times than not here. We're going to side with Walker. I think he gets it done and he finishes on the mat. Walker by TKO. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our next matchup in the lightweight division, as Ignasio Bahamondes is a minus 340 favorite with the comeback on Christos Giagos at plus 270. And we'll start on the Bahamondes side. This is a guy who's very long and rangy for the division, very powerful striker, comes from a kickboxing background, a long pedigree with his father being a fighter as well. But he's also got some, I think, underrated submission upside in a matchup like this. This is a guy who's coming off a decision loss to Ludovic Klein, where he was just kind of outclassed in this spot. But you go back and watch the Zhu Rong fight, and that was a guy that was looking to wrestle him, kind of like I expect Giagos to do, and he ended up submitting him inside the third round. He's very long. He's got those long limbs, like I mentioned. He's liable to snatch something up against somebody like Giagos, who's been submitted 6 times in his career. So it's one where I don't fully trust Bahamondes because he gets sloppy defensively and he's liable to get cracked, and we've seen that chin get checked multiple times, even against guys that don't have a ton of power, like John McDessie. And Giagos is powerful in that first round. We've seen him hurt guys in the first round and finish them at times as well. The issue with Giagos is the cardio doesn't hold up, and he continuously puts himself in bad spots grappling. He's been finished in 8 of his 11 losses. So it's one where I think Bahamondes can crack him on the feet or potentially submit him as well. I think Bahamondes gets the finish here. We're going Bahamondes by TKO. That's the official pick. And next fight up, we have one of the matchups I'm most excited to watch from a fan perspective, as Morgan Charrier comes in as a small favorite at minus 122. The comeback on Chepe Mariscal is plus 102. And this is one where I kind of like both of these guys. I want to see them both have success at the UFC level. Obviously, we saw Charrier in that UFC debut highlight reel knockout, hurt him to the body with explosive kicks, and ended up getting the finish there in front of his home crowd. Very impressive stuff. And he's a guy that's won most of his fights by knockout. 11 of his 19 wins have come in that fashion. The problem is when you see him go the distance, he's not fighting on these big margins where he's blowing guys out, because even though he's a solid grappler, he just doesn't use it enough. So a lot of times he's in these competitive rounds, and if those big moments don't materialize, he's just not really doing a ton. So we've seen him lose a couple close split decisions on the regional scene. I expect that to probably happen at the UFC level as well. And on the Chepe Mariscal side, he's not a huge decision fighter either. Even though he's capable of winning them, he's another guy who, at times, he needs those big moments. And he was kind of fortunate his last fight against Jack Jenkins. He dropped the first round, and then Jenkins hurt his arm. So he won by TKO. So he's on back-to-back wins here in the UFC, both times as an underdog, looking to make it number 3. But this is going to be a tough test for him. I expect both of these guys to have success at times. I lean Mariscal as having the better cardio down the stretch, but in a close fight, I lean with the power of Charrier. I think he's going to be landing the bigger shots, and I think those explosive kicks can be the difference as well. So we're going to go with Charrier by decision. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our co-main event, as Alexander Hernandez is a minus 205 favorite with Damon Jackson on the comeback at plus 170. And look, man, if Alex Hernandez loses this fight, they might as well ship him off to PFL, because they've done just about everything they can do to try to give this guy winnable fights, build up that confidence back. Like, if he loses to Damon Jackson here, like, I think we're done. I think we're at that point. But honestly, this is his fight to lose, because from a skill set standpoint, I think Hernandez is better than Damon Jackson wherever this fight goes. Hernandez at his best is a very technical striker, fast jab, sharp leg kicks as well, and a good ground game. He's got solid wrestling. He can control his opponents on the mat, and he holds a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. The problem is, like always, the problem with Hernandez, the dude's a mental midget. And as soon as the tide starts to turn at all, anytime his opponent starts to have even a little bit of success against him, he just absolutely crumbles. And that's the concern you have with a guy like Hernandez. I'm just hoping that that doesn't happen here against Damon Jackson, who's primarily a grappler and wants to stick you on the mat, out-grapple you. I'm just not sure he's going to be able to do that against Hernandez here. And on the feet, Damon Jackson at times thinks he's a boxer and wants to brawl in the pocket with these guys. He just doesn't have the chin to hold up. He's been knocked out 4 times in his career, and a couple of those were brutal knockouts as well. So I don't trust him on the feet in terms of the durability, and I just don't think he's going to have the grappling success that he needs in a fight like this. So I'm going to side with Hernandez. I think it hits the judges' scorecards. We're going Hernandez by decision, but I think there's better fights to target on DraftKings. Which brings us to our rematch in the main event here as Brendan Allen looks to seek revenge on his loss a couple years ago to Chris Curtis. He's currently a -205 favorite with Curtis on the comeback at +170. And Brendan Allen's been one of my, like, not favorite fighters, but definitely one that I like more than I think the general public does. And I tend to give him a little bit more respect than the public does as well, because yes, he's got his flaws just like everybody does, but I think he gets criticized more so in the betting community because he's not, you know, super clean with how he gets these finishes, and his wrestling could be better. And on the feet, you know, he falls in love with his hands, but his chin doesn't really hold up at times. And I think a lot of that is warranted in a matchup like this. And as much as I love Brendan Allen, I'm actually going to side with the underdog here in a fighter who I don't love in Chris Curtis. And it's not just because of the way the fight played out the first time, but from a stylistic standpoint, Chris Curtis has excellent takedown defense. What does he do? He defends takedowns very well. He forces you to box with him. He's a powerful counter striker. And I just think that plays perfectly against a guy like Brendan Allen. We saw it the first time they fought. I expect the fight to play out pretty similarly here, where Brendan Allen can't get takedowns. He's going to try to brawl with Chris Curtis, and Curtis is going to pick him apart in those exchanges and eventually hurt him and probably knock him out. I'm not going to fade Brendan Allen on DraftKings because Allen's upside is a big score. His upside is if he can force any grappling exchange, he's going to be dangerous and live to finish the fight at that point. Now, we saw in that first fight, he was trying whatever he can. He jumped on a single leg. Curtis kind of hopped out of it. He slightly got him down, popped right back up. Brendan Allen tried to take the back. Didn't work. You also saw Allen try to pull guard, look for a heel hook. You know, that's his upside, is he's got to force some type of grappling exchange and is going to have to finish it at that point, because if not, he's going to get stuck at space with Chris Curtis, who's a better boxer, who's got better durability, and who I think is going to eventually end up hurting him. And we've seen this huge run of underdogs in the main event. I think it's like 7 of the last 11 underdogs in the main event have won. And I kind of just think the train keeps on rolling here. I'm not going to get in its way despite my fandom for Brendan Allen. So we're going Chris Curtis by TKO. That's the official pick. And as always, guys, fightnumbers.com will have my ownership projections, my DraftKings player rankings as well. We got the odds screen that updates in real time for UFC. We got Pepe, Evan, Aussie's picks behind the paywall. We also just dropped a free tool for anybody to use. You don't even have to have a login account. It's the Fight Prop Finder. I tweeted it out on Twitter at Jon Kelly DFS the other day. Be sure to check that out. It's completely free. You search any fighter, and if they have odds posted for props on sports books, it's going to display that across the industry. So it's an easy way for you to line shop. It's going to show what the KO prop is on FanDuel versus the 10 other books or whatever else it pulls from, as long as those odds are posted. Completely free to use. That's fightnumbers.com/fightpropfinder /. Be sure to check it out. As always, best of luck. We'll see you guys next time.